Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're diving deep with Kabir. His poem, Fearlessly I Will Sing the Attributes of the One Without Attributes. I mean, we all know Kabir's work, but today we're really going to unpack it, going beyond those powerful metaphors and symbols that he uses to illuminate the path to spiritual realization.
And I think what's really cool is we've got this really fantastic explanation of the poem to help guide us. So really, you can think of this deep dive as a chance to uncover those hidden depths, to see how Kabir takes us on this journey towards, well, oneness with everything.
Oneness with everything. And that's a big promise. I'm ready to see how he gets us there. One of the things that struck me right away is how Kabir just dives right in, addressing fear head on.
It's like he's acknowledging right off the bat that fear is the biggest obstacle on this path to achieving what he's talking about. And what I like is that Kabir doesn't sugarcoat anything. He's just coming out and saying, if you want to reach these spiritual heights, you've got to confront fear first.
Yeah, it makes me think about all those times in my life when I've held back from doing something because I was afraid of failing or, being judged, afraid of what people would think. And that really resonates with the idea that, fear can keep us from reaching our full potential.
Absolutely. And Kabir's suggesting that the first step is acceptance. And not just accepting your reality, but accepting your limitations, even your fears themselves. That acceptance becomes the foundation for growth.
That's interesting because he doesn't say ignore your fear or pretend it's not there. He's saying accept it and then we'll go from there. So once we've kind of faced that fear, what's next on this roadmap to spiritual realization?
He gives us this incredibly vivid image. Using the base lotus as the steady seat, I will make the wind rise in reverse. Now, that's something I want to unpack.
Let's unpack that. The lotus metaphor, I feel like that's pretty classic. It's this beautiful flower that grows in muddy water rising above it all. But the reversed wind, that's where I get a little lost.
Yeah. So think of the lotus as our foundation. It's rooted in the mud, symbolizing the challenges, the negativity we all face. And Kabir is saying that negativity isn't inherently bad. It's just energy. It's the mud from which the lotus blossoms.
So instead of resisting or rejecting the difficult parts of life, we can actually use them as fuel for growth. It's like turning compost into flowers.
Exactly. And the reversed wind is about shifting our energy. Usually our energy flows downwards, pulled by our attachments, worries, desires, all those things that keep us tethered to this limited perspective.
Yeah, it's like gravity is pulling our energy down, keeping us stuck.
Precisely. Kabir is saying we need to reverse that flow. He's talking about consciously channeling our energy upwards, overcoming that downward pull of those attachments.
That reversed wind imagery makes me think of a rocket launch. It takes immense power to overcome gravity and soar upwards. So how do we create that kind of upward momentum in our own lives?
Kabir gives us a guide in the form of the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. He's not talking about the literal elements here, but using them as metaphors for stages in our spiritual development.
Okay, I'm intrigued. We already talked about accepting the earthy reality of our fears. What's next in this elemental journey?
Well, think of water. It's fluid, creative, deeply connected to our emotions. Moving into this water stage involves tapping into our creativity, expressing our emotions in a healthy way, and embracing the flow of life instead of resisting it.
Oh, so it's like we're channeling that water energy to become more adaptable, more in tune with the ebb and flow of life. And then what's next? Fire, maybe?
You got it. Fire represents power, passion, and action. It's about harnessing that energy to create positive change. Think about setting goals with passion, standing up for what you believe in, bringing more enthusiasm to everything you do.
So earth for grounding, water for flow, fire for action. What about air? I'm picturing lightness, connection, maybe even a sense of freedom.
You're right on track. Air symbolizes love, communication, and connection. The stage involves cultivating compassion, building meaningful relationships, expressing yourself authentically.
It sounds like each element builds on the previous one. Like we're moving from grounding ourselves in reality to tapping into our creative flow, then fueling action with passion, and finally connecting with love and compassion. It's like we're climbing a ladder, each rung taking us higher. But where does ether fit into this?
Ether is the most subtle element, representing transcendence, spirituality, connection to something larger than ourselves. It's about recognizing that interconnectedness, experiencing a sense of oneness with the universe.
Wow. So ether is the summit, the place where all the elements converge, where we finally experience that oneness Kabir is talking about. But he also emphasizes the importance of balancing the Ingila, Pingala, and Sukman. Can you explain what those are and how they relate to mastering the elements?
Absolutely. So these are energy channels within us, and Kabir's highlighting the need for balance. Think of Ingila as the cooling lunar energy, connected to calmness and introspection. Pingala is the heating solar energy associated with action and engagement with the world.
So it's like two sides of a coin, the inner world and the outer world, reflection and action. Where does Sukhman fit in?
Sukhman is the central channel, the path to balance and spiritual awakening. It's about finding that sweet spot between Ingila and Pingala, not suppressing one or the other, but integrating both into a harmonious whole.
It's reminding me of that saying, everything in moderation, but applied to our internal energy. So it's not about being constantly on or constantly withdrawn, but finding that balance between the two. How do we even know if our Ingila and Pingala are out of balance? What are some signs?
Think about how you feel. If you're constantly overwhelmed, stressed, and find it hard to slow down, that could be a sign that your Pingala energy is dominant. On the other hand, if you're feeling stuck, unmotivated, and withdrawn, perhaps your Ingila energy needs a boost.
So it's about being aware of how we're feeling and making adjustments to bring ourselves back into balance. But how does Kabir suggest we do that? What practices help us find that equilibrium?
He doesn't prescribe specific techniques, but his poetry emphasizes this inner journey. Practices like meditation, mindfulness, breath work, anything that helps us connect to our inner world can help us understand and balance these energies. It's about cultivating that awareness of what's happening within us, rather than constantly being pulled by external forces.
So by mastering the elements and balancing these internal energies, we're creating a foundation for that next stage of the journey. And what does that next stage look like according to Kabir?
Well, he uses this incredibly powerful image, bathing at the confluence of the three rivers.
Okay, that sounds pretty epic. Is this like a real place, or is it more of a symbolic location?
It's both. He's referencing the Triveni, a sacred confluence of rivers in India. But he's emphasizing that the real transformation, the real bathing happens internally. It's about transcending time and space within ourselves, not through external rituals or pilgrimages.
So we're not literally taking a dip in some holy water, but rather diving deep within ourselves to experience this confluence of energies. What does that internal bathing look like?
He says, "The 5 and 25 I will master by my wish and string them together by one common thread. The 5 and 25 are the 5 senses and the 25 ways we perceive the world."
So he's talking about mastering our senses, our perceptions. But how do we do that? Our senses are how we experience the world. They're what make us human.
That's true. But Kabir is suggesting that our senses can also limit our understanding. They can keep us trapped in a very narrow view of reality. By mastering them, we can transcend those limitations.
So instead of being controlled by our senses, we become masters of them. We learn to see beyond the surface, beyond the limitations of our physical perceptions.
Exactly. And that's where the one common thread comes in. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of everything, seeing how everything is woven together by this underlying unity.
That makes me think of those optical illusions where you see one image, and then suddenly your perception shifts and you see something completely different. It's the same image, but you're seeing it with new eyes.
That's a great analogy. Kabir is guiding us towards that shift in perception, that moment when we break free from the limitations of our usual way of seeing things. He's leading us towards the summit of aloneness, which sounds paradoxical, right?
Totally. How can you be alone and connected to everything at the same time? It seems contradictory.
That's the beauty of Kabir's poetry. He's pointing to a state that transcends our usual understanding of self and other. It's about recognizing that we are both unique individuals and inseparable parts of a larger whole.
So we're not losing our individuality in this oneness, but rather realizing that our individuality is only possible because of this underlying interconnectedness.
Precisely. And from that realization, from that summit of aloneness, comes this profound sense of liberation. It's a state of complete unity where boundaries dissolve and we experience the fullness of our being.
Wow, that's a powerful image. So we've faced our fears, we've transformed negativity, we've climbed through the elements, balanced our inner energies, bathed in the confluence of rivers, and reached the summit of oneness. What's left on this incredible journey?
Well, Kabir doesn't leave us hanging at the summit. He talks about waving the flag of victory and hearing the unstruck Anahad sound. It's a celebration, a culmination of the journey.
So we've reached the peak, and now we're taking it all in, experiencing the joy and freedom that comes with realizing our true nature. But what is this unstruck sound? What's he talking about?
He's talking about the symphony of creation itself, the underlying harmony of the universe, the vibration that connects everything. It's not a sound you can hear with your ears, but something you feel deep within your being.
So it's like we've attuned ourselves to the frequency of the universe, and now we're vibrating in harmony with it.
Exactly. And from that state of attunement, we experience this profound sense of peace, joy, and connection to something far greater than ourselves.
This is all so inspiring, but I have to admit, it's a lot to take in. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. How do we even begin to apply this wisdom to our own lives? It can feel overwhelming to think about mastering all these elements, balancing our energies, transcending our senses. Where do we even start?
That's a great question, and one that we'll explore further in the next part of this deep dive.
Okay, I'm eager to hear more. I'm already feeling a shift in my perspective just from unpacking these first few stanzas.
That's the power of Kabir's poetry. It has a way of shaking things up, challenging our assumptions, and inviting us to see the world in a new light. But for now, let's take a break and let these ideas settle in a bit.
Sounds good to me. We'll be back soon to continue our exploration of Kabir's incredible wisdom. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about just the immensity of Kabir's vision, and now it can feel a bit overwhelming to actually put this into practice. But it's a journey, not a destination. You don't have to master everything all at once.
Right? It's like climbing a mountain. You don't just teleport to the top. You got to take it one step at a time and enjoy the view along the way. So what's a good first step on this journey toward oneness, according to Kabir?
What's interesting is he keeps coming back to this idea of facing our fears. And it's not about becoming fearless overnight, but learning to act in spite of the fear. Fear is a natural part of being human, but it doesn't have to control our lives.
That's easier said than done, right? I mean, it's one thing to intellectually understand that fear is an illusion, but it's another to actually feel it in your body and still move forward.
Absolutely. And Kabir doesn't dismiss that. He's not saying just ignore your fear either. He's acknowledging that fear is real, it can be powerful. But he's also saying that we have the power to choose how we respond to it.
Before the break, we were talking about that reversed wind imagery and how it's about shifting our energy upwards, overcoming that downward pull of our attachments. Can you say more about that? What does it actually feel like to experience that reversed wind in our own lives?
Well, it's different for everyone. But, some common threads kind of emerge. You might feel a surge of creativity, a newfound sense of clarity, or a deep feeling of inner peace. It's not about feeling super energized all the time. It's more about a shift in perspective, an alignment with something larger than yourself.
So it's not about denying those fears or pretending they don't exist, but finding a way to shift our relationship to them. It's about recognizing that fear is just energy, and energy can be transformed.
Exactly. Remember the lotus, growing from the mud. Our challenges, our fears,
Yeah.
they can actually be the fertilizer for our spiritual growth.
So how do we actually do that? How do we transform that fear energy into something that nourishes us, helps us grow?
Well, there's no one-size-fits-all answer, but there are definitely practices that can help. Meditation, for example. It can calm the mind and help us observe our thoughts and emotions without getting swept away by them.
It's like creating that base lotus, that steady seat within ourselves.
Yeah.
That image really resonated with me. It's about cultivating that inner stability, that groundedness. That allows us to face our fears without being overwhelmed by them.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And from that place of stability, we can start to explore those fears, understand their root causes. Perhaps we journal about them, talk to a therapist, express them through art, or simply confide in a trusted friend. It's about bringing those fears out into the open where they can be examined and transformed.
It makes me think about all those times when I've been so afraid to do something, like give a presentation or share my writing with someone. But then once I actually do it, the fear starts to dissipate. It's like by taking action, by moving through the fear, we create space for something new to emerge.
That's exactly what Kabir is getting at. It's not about conquering fear in some kind of epic battle, but about gently unraveling it, understanding it, integrating it into our experience.
Speaking of integration, how does this idea of mastering the elements fit into all of this? Earlier, you mentioned that each element represents a stage in our spiritual development. Can you kind of walk us through those stages again?
Of course. So remember, we begin with earth, representing acceptance of our reality, including our fears. Then we move to water, which is all about embracing flow, tapping into creativity, expressing our emotions.
It's interesting to think about those elements, not just as these external forces, but as energies within ourselves. So when we talk about mastering an element, we're really talking about mastering a particular aspect of our being.
Exactly. And from water, we flow into the fire element, Fire is about passion, action, and power. It's about taking that creative energy and channeling it towards our goals, our purpose, our contribution to the world.
So we're moving from grounding ourselves in reality to embracing flow, then fueling our actions with passion. What comes after fire?
Air, the element of love, communication, and connection. This is where we cultivate compassion, build meaningful relationships, learn to express ourselves authentically.
It's like each element is building on the previous one. We're becoming more grounded, more fluid, more passionate, and then finally, more connected to ourselves and others.
You're getting it. And finally, we reach ether, the most subtle element. Ether represents transcendence, spirituality, and that connection to something larger than ourselves.
So ether is like the culmination, the place where we finally experience that oneness Kabir's talking about. It's like we've climbed on the mountain, and now we're standing at the summit, taking in this breathtaking view.
That's a beautiful way to put it. But remember, Kabir emphasizes that this is not a linear process. We might experience glimpses of these different stages at various points in our lives.
Right.
It's not about checking boxes, but about continually deepening our understanding and integrating these different aspects of ourselves.
Oh, that makes sense. It makes me think about how a musician might practice different scales and techniques,
Think of that.
gradually developing their mastery over the instrument. It's not about perfecting one thing before moving on to the next, but about continually refining and expanding their skills.
That's a great analogy. And just like a musician needs to practice regularly to maintain their skills, we need to cultivate practices that support our spiritual growth. Whether it's meditation, yoga, spending time in nature, or engaging in acts of service. It's about finding what nourishes our soul and helps us connect to that inner stillness.
So it's not about achieving some kind of static state of enlightenment, but about engaging in this lifelong practice of growth and transformation.
Exactly. And along the way, we might encounter challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt. But those are all part of the journey. In fact, Kabir might say that those challenges are the very things that help us deepen our understanding and cultivate true resilience.
It's like that lotus metaphor again. The lotus doesn't grow in perfectly pristine conditions. It grows in the mud, in the midst of challenges.
Precisely. And it's those challenges that give the lotus its strength and its beauty.
Earlier you mentioned the Ingala, Pingala, and Sukman, these energy channels within us. How can we tell if these energies are out of balance? And what can we do to bring them back into harmony?
It's about paying attention to how we feel, both physically and emotionally. If we're feeling agitated, anxious, or restless, that could be a sign that our Pingala energy, that fiery, outward-focused energy, is dominant.
So if I'm feeling like I'm constantly on the go, always rushing, always trying to do a million things at once, that might be a sign that my Pingala is out of whack.
It could be. And on the other hand, if you're feeling withdrawn, lethargic, or unmotivated, that could indicate that your Ingila energy, the cooling, inward-focused energy, is dominant.
It's like those times when I just want to curl up on the couch with a good book and shut out the world. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but if it becomes a pattern, maybe it's a sign that I need to bring in a little more fire, a little more action.
Exactly. And remember, the goal is not to eliminate one type of energy in favor of the other, but to find that balance, that sweet spot where both energies are flowing harmoniously.
So what are some practical things we can do to bring those energies back into balance? Well, if you're feeling overwhelmed and burnt out, perhaps you need to incorporate more grounding and calming practices into your life. Spending time in nature, taking a yoga class, practicing deep breathing exercises, or simply creating space for stillness and reflection can help soothe that fiery Pingala energy.
And if you're feeling stuck in a rut, uninspired, and lacking motivation, maybe you need to bring in some more fire, some more action. Set some exciting goals, connect with people who inspire you, or engage in activities that spark your passion.
That's the spirit. It's about listening to your body and your intuition and making choices that support your overall well-being. Remember, there's no one right way to do this. It's about finding what works for you.
So by mastering the elements and balancing our internal energies, we're essentially preparing ourselves for that next stage of the journey, that bathing at the confluence of the three rivers that Kabir talks about. Can you say more about what that means? What does it look like to experience that confluence within ourselves? Well, remember how Kabir talks about mastering the 5 and 25 and stringing them together with one common thread. He's pointing to a profound shift in perception, a transcendence of our usual way of experiencing the world.
So instead of being limited by our 5 senses and the 25 ways we perceive the world, we start to see beyond those limitations. It's like we're expanding our awareness, seeing the interconnectedness of everything.
Exactly. We start to see the world with new eyes, recognizing the unity that underlies all apparent separation.
It makes me think about those moments when you're like deeply immersed in nature and you feel this sense of awe and wonder at the beauty and complexity of it all. You lose track of time, you lose track of your separate self, and you just feel this deep sense of connection to everything around you.
That's a beautiful example. And those moments, however fleeting they may be, they give us a taste of what Kabir is pointing to. It's a state of being where the boundaries between self and other dissolve, and we experience the fullness of our connection to the universe.
It's almost like we're returning to a state of childlike wonder, where everything is new and interconnected.
I love that. There's a sense of innocence and openness in those moments, a willingness to let go of our preconceived notions and simply experience the world as it is.
But how do we cultivate that kind of awareness? It's easy to experience those moments of connection when you're surrounded by the beauty of nature. But how do we bring that awareness into our everyday lives, especially when we're faced with challenges and difficulties?
That's where the real work begins. It's about practicing mindfulness, paying attention to the present moment, noticing the subtle ways in which everything is interconnected. It could be as simple as taking a moment to appreciate the warmth of the sun on your skin, the taste of your food, or the sound of laughter in the air.
So it's about finding those little moments of connection throughout the day, those glimpses of the divine in the ordinary.
Exactly. And as we do that, we start to cultivate a sense of gratitude and wonder, a deep appreciation for the gift of life.
It makes me think of that quote by William Blake. To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour.
Beautiful. That's exactly what Kabir is inviting us to do, to see the infinite within the finite, the eternal within the temporal.
But what about all the suffering in the world? How can we stay connected to this sense of oneness when we're surrounded by so much pain?
That's a profound question, and one that has been pondered by spiritual seekers for centuries. And Kabir doesn't shy away from it. In fact, he sees suffering as an integral part of the human experience.
So it's not about denying or ignoring the pain, but about finding a way to hold it with compassion and understanding.
Beautifully put. Kabir believed that true spiritual growth comes from facing the darkness as well as the light. It's about acknowledging the pain, without judgment, without resistance.
So it's not about pretending that everything is okay, but about holding the pain and the joy, the light and the darkness in a balanced way.
Beautifully said. And that's where Kabir's metaphor of the lotus comes full circle. Remember how the lotus grows from the mud? In a similar way, our greatest challenges can become the fertile ground for our spiritual growth.
So it's about finding those seeds of wisdom and compassion within our struggles and allowing them to blossom. It's about recognizing that even in the midst of suffering, there's a deeper truth, a deeper connection that holds us all.
Exactly. And as we cultivate that awareness, we start to see the interconnectedness of all things, even the painful parts. We realize that our own suffering is not separate from the suffering of others, and that our compassion can be a source of healing for ourselves and for the world.
It's like by embracing the totality of our experience, both the light and the dark, we're tapping into this deeper well of compassion, a deeper understanding of what it means to be human.
Precisely. And that's where Kabir's wisdom about bathing at the confluence of the three rivers takes on this new dimension. It's not just about transcending time and space, but about embracing the fullness of our human experience, with all its complexities and contradictions.
It's like we're diving into the river of life, allowing ourselves to be swept away by the current, trusting that even in the midst of turbulence, there's this deeper force that's guiding us, holding us, and connecting us all.
That's a beautiful image, and I think that's a perfect place to pause for now. In the next part of this deep dive, we'll explore how Kabir guides us beyond that confluence, towards the culmination of the journey, where we wave the flag of victory and hear the unstruck Anahad sound.
I can't wait to hear about that. I'm already feeling a shift in my perspective, a sense of expansion and possibility, just from exploring these first few stages of the journey.
That's the power of Kabir's poetry. It has a way of opening our minds and hearts to new ways of seeing ourselves in the world.
We'll be back soon to continue our exploration of Kabir's incredible wisdom. Until then, let these ideas simmer and see how they resonate within you.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Kabir's Fearlessly, I Will Sing the Attributes of the One Without Attributes. I feel like at this point we're on this incredible journey, and Kabir is our guide. Yeah, he's leading us somewhere. And before the break, we were talking about that feeling of interconnectedness, bathing at the confluence of the three rivers within ourselves. But Kabir, he doesn't stop there. he takes us even further.
Right. He talks about this waving the flag of victory and hearing the unstruck Anahad sound. It sounds almost triumphant, like a celebration at the end of a long journey. What is he celebrating?
Yeah, he's describing the culmination of that spiritual journey, that moment when we fully realize our true nature and we connect to the underlying harmony of the universe. It's like reaching the peak of a mountain after this long and arduous climb. And you stand there taking in this breathtaking panorama. You feel this incredible sense of exhilaration and accomplishment.
That flag of victory image really captures that sense of triumph. Like we've overcome all the obstacles, faced all the fears, and we've finally arrived. But what about this unstruck sound? Is that something we can actually hear?
It's not a sound that you hear with your physical ears, but rather a vibration that you feel deep within your being. It's the sound of creation itself, that underlying hum of the universe, the pulse of life that connects everything.
So it's like we've attuned ourselves to the frequency of the universe, and now we're vibrating in harmony with it.
Exactly. And from that state of attunement, we experience this profound sense of peace and joy, a connection to something far greater than ourselves. Think of it like tuning a musical instrument. When all the strings are in harmony, the sound is clear, resonant, and just beautiful.
It's like we've become part of the orchestra of the universe, playing our own unique part in this grand symphony of creation.
That's a wonderful way to put it. And that's what Kabir is pointing to in these final stanzas. He's inviting us to experience that state of harmonious resonance, that deep connection to the source of all being.
This is all so inspiring, but I have to admit, there's a part of me that wonders, like, is this really attainable? Can we actually experience this kind of transcendence in our everyday lives?
That's a question that many spiritual seekers, I think, grapple with. And I think the answer is both yes and no. It's not about achieving some kind of permanent state of bliss where we never experience challenges or difficulties again.
Right, because life is full of ups and downs. We're going to experience joy and sorrow, ease and struggle, no matter how spiritually advanced we become.
Exactly. But what Kabir is pointing to is a shift in perspective, a way of being in the world that allows us to navigate those ups and downs with more grace, wisdom, and compassion.
So it's not about escaping from the world or transcending our human experience, but about embracing it more fully with all its complexities and contradictions.
Beautifully said. It's about recognizing that even in the midst of challenges and suffering, there's a deeper truth, a deeper connection that holds us all. And it's that connection that gives us the strength and resilience to face whatever life throws our way.
Kabir talks about this summit of aloneness, which just seems paradoxical. How can we be both alone and connected at the same time?
It is a profound paradox, and one that points to a truth that I don't think can be fully grasped with the intellect alone. It's something that needs to be experienced.
So how do we experience it? What practices can help us cultivate that sense of aloneness? That's also a sense of unity.
It's about cultivating a deep sense of presence, being fully present in this moment, without the distractions of the past or the worries of the future. Practices like meditation, mindfulness, spending time in nature. These can all help us quiet the mind and open to that deeper awareness.
Like we're creating space for that stillness within, that place where we can connect to the source of all being.
Exactly. And from that place of stillness, we start to see things differently. The boundaries between self and other begin to blur. We recognize that interconnectedness of everything, and we experience a sense of unity that transcends our limited sense of self.
Earlier, we talked about mastering the elements, balancing those internal energies of Injila and Pingala. Where do those practices fit into this journey towards the summit?
Those are all part of the preparation, the training ground for reaching that state of oneness. By grounding ourselves in reality, embracing our emotions, fueling our actions with passion, cultivating love and compassion, we're essentially creating a strong and stable foundation for that final ascent.
It's like we're building a staircase, step by step. That leads us to the top of the mountain.
And along the way, we're developing the skills and the resilience we need to navigate the challenges that inevitably arise.
So we've explored Kabir's roadmap for spiritual realization, from facing our fears to mastering the elements, balancing our energies, and ultimately reaching that state of oneness. What's the one key takeaway you hope listeners will carry with them from this deep dive?
I hope they'll remember that this journey isn't about achieving some distant goal, but it's about embracing the present moment. It's about finding that stillness within, connecting to that underlying unity that connects us all, and living from that place of awareness in every aspect of our lives.
Beautifully said. And I hope they'll remember that this is not a journey that we have to take alone. We have Kabir's poetry as our guide. We have each other for support. And we have the infinite wisdom of the universe within us, always guiding us towards the light.
Absolutely. And as we conclude this deep dive, I invite listeners to take a moment to reflect on Kabir's words and to consider how they might apply to their own lives. What is one fear you could start facing today? What is one step you could take to bring more presence, more awareness, more love into your life?
That's a great question to ponder. And remember, even the smallest step taken with courage and intention can create ripples of transformation that extend far beyond ourselves.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the wisdom of Kabir. May his words continue to inspire and guide you on your own unique journey.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep shining your light.